Welcome to the car tutorial section 5. I'm going to show you a little bit about what we're going to have after we work through this tutorial. These are some examples of what our app is going to be able to do. Anything from analytics to filtering through purchases, and obviously your cart and inventory all will be working. So let's add one more item to our object in our purchase logs. This object is going to be quantity, and it's basically something we're going to compare to whatever's been sold, the amount sold, within our analytics. So this is just a portion of our inventory. And it's a good example of what I'll do to add on, and throughout you have to add on multiple places, whether it's populating the field, whether you're adding, deleting, editing. Those all need to now know that there's going to be a new key and value called quantity, stock quantity. This is also one example I can tell of where it's better to build a prototype as opposed to a lot of paperwork. It's one of those things where if you have a working prototype with fake data, whether it's coming in from wherever, this one's coming in from local storage currently, build this out first so what your data is going to look like will be understood long before you ever build your back end. And then you'll also have the working HTML and CSS and whatever JavaScript you might need long before. Within your prototype, all this stuff gets accomplished, and you don't have to write 250 pages worth of documentation. Let's take a look and see. I've got my quantity available. Let's type something in. Just make up something like swim goggles here. Now let's see if that worked. Okay. So yes, it worked, but there wasn't anything that told me it worked. So let's go ahead and get an alert. And I think I spent a little bit of time because I wrote my function here wrong. It's not a hook, it's a function that's brought in from somewhere else. So eventually I'll change this up correctly. And it's also one of those things where we need to clear out the form. So there's the clear form being called from above to clear out all the input fields and hopefully bring the select menu back to its first option. And let's modularize out item selector. We'll be using this in multiple areas, so it's easier just to write it once and then import it. And I'm going to keep the function called populate fields, and it may mean something on different places where I import this module, but I'll just make sure I name whenever change happens, populate fields will be the function name of wherever it's called from. Coincidentally, it's going to be two different functions, but they're named the same because they get called from separate places. It just needs to stay the same. Now I'm just going to grab my local storage items so I can populate this menu. In the future, this will all be done with Axios. It's got to go in the right place. We got to inject props into this. So, okay, so select I'm still not showing anything. There we go. There's our items. And we make sure that populate fields gets passed down to the item selector as well. And we also need to clear forms and show alert. And we also need to fix the way the show alert is passed in. It's not a hook, so we'll change it down to show alert as a function. Okay, so now we are populating fields. That is correct. Index need to be in a selected index is in past tense. And let's go ahead and populate, change something, edit. Yep, delete. Everything's working correctly. Okay, we're going to do the same thing that we did a second ago with the item selector. We're going to modularize the time selection too. So we'll be bringing this time selector out and put it into the app.js, and we'll be utilizing it within multiple modules. So no one wants to write something twice, and this is going to be a good example of how to successfully modularize a timestamp. Once we're done here, our time selector is going to basically select a window of time that it would like to see data from, so it doesn't bring in all the data anymore. We will match it against data and saying, hey, if this matches the window of time we'd like to see, then we shall bring it in and then pass this from the app.js down to our modules. So it will be a much smaller amount of data being passed around. And as you can see, I've just copy and pasted the HTML from our purchase log to our, and now we're just going to import the time selector. And now here we go with just adding our HTML into its own module for the drop-down menus for time selection. We're going to do a basic use effect, and this is going to make sure that everything's loaded correctly. Okay, so we're going to make a function called time search here in app, take it out of purchase log, and that function is going to determine what window of time we'd like to see. And in the future we'll be using Axios, so I will just send this request for this. It's basically a comparison of our timestamp, and it'll be having the year, the month, the day, and the hour based on what's selected. So if they just want the whole year, then we can get that just by having the year written. If I wanted a month, then it would be the year dash and then what month, and in which case it would go and ask, as opposed to in this case we're asking the local storage, we would be asking the server, just give us everything that matches the timestamp with this month and this year, so on and so forth. So I'm going to build the time selector to be above our purchase log and it will also be above our analytics too. And ultimately, this module will show up based on if the active module is going to be purchase log or analytics. So, like I said, some of these modules will be showing up in multiple different occasions depending on what other modules are showing. And we got to make sure we just pass this time search correctly. The year and the month need to be passed on as well, because the app.js will know that. I don't think we're going to be using set compare time anymore. I'm going to take this out. And let's start building out a little bit more about what kind of time we were going to be looking for. We want to find a way to match up all the purchases and see if it matches our time window. So in this case, since we're working locally at this time, we're going to go into local storage, and we'll be grabbing the purchase log, in this case all of it, and we'll be calling it temp purchasing log. And we'll turn it into an object, because it's always a string when it's in local storage. And now we're going to walk through it with a for loop. And now we also want to single out a portion of the ID from the sale ID. We're going to start, and if you remember, the sale ID starts with an email, and then there's a colon, and then our timestamp. So here we're saying we'd like to start at the colon, and then see if it equals our temp time, which is above, and it is basically all of our drop-down menu times laid out in a fashion that would match our timestamps. And if it does match any of our requested times, then I'd like to go ahead and put it to we push this into the temp time selected array or object. Now time selected is going to be the key element here. We're going to set time selected, and time selected will be the data we pass around from module to module. This is everything that matches with our window of time requested. We got to make sure we spell everything right in capitals. Definitely make a difference. And here it is, all the sales that were sold within the time selected, anything that matched our time request. Now we need to make sure that the purchase log gets that specific data. There we are, time selected now instead of purchase log. We're not going to have to match the ID here because we already did that. Time selector is not going to be imported here. It actually lives above this module in the app.js. And let's put a little space above our heading. And this will just be our title for our time selector. And we'll have time search fire off when that module is loaded. So they'll have some data once the user gets around to that page. And we don't want to, it's making time selected, so that doesn't make sense. Time search is what we need to pass to this module, which is above in the app.js, along with month and year, which are declared in JavaScript just above. There we are. We're going to go from days to days, and it seems to be working. Now let's make a filter by users within our purchase log. This way you can find out a little greater magnification, who's selling what, when. Now remember, we don't have a list just yet of all of our users. We're going to get that from the time selected data that gets passed down to the purchase log. So as that data comes in, we're going to filter through it. And remember, the sale ID has, the first section is the user email, and then there's a colon and the timestamp. We're going to be able to extract the user email out of that and build this user list. So if nobody has any sales in the time requested, their name will not show up. We just got to make sure we have some data. There we are. From 0 to where the colon is within the sale ID. We just need that. That's just the user email of the sale. And we'll ask, is this user email already listed within the temp users array? And -1 means no. If there's a number, that means yes. That means the location of it. So if -1, we'll push this new user email that has not been represented into that array. The array of temp users is ultimately going to be set into user list. Okay, so set user list is going to be set to whatever temp users was built as. So all of our users were placed in there, now set to the user list. And we're going to build a function called search employee. We're going to find the value of the select user list. So select user is the name of the select menu. We want to find the value. And whatever that value is going to be set to our search. And from here, we're going to map the user list to build out our select menu. All users has a value of no characters at all, which means if you do that, everyone will show up because we're looking to see who has the match. And if there's no characters, everyone matches. We will walk through each email to build this list. Use a ternary operator, so if there's no list, then it'll just be null. And here we'll build our ternary operator. If the sale ID has an index that matches or does not match, will be based on whether the item is hidden or not. So if it doesn't match, the characters don't match our search of the value of the select index menu, then it won't print it. Or it'll just be hidden basically. So everything has to match Hank at testing.com. And these are all things, if they don't match this within their sale ID, then that user didn't sell it. So it will just hide it. Now let's move into the inventory and analytics. We're going to use the exact same data we've been doing. So we're not creating any new data here. We will be using the time selected, which is a component that is built into the app.js, and that's going to retrieve this, just like the purchase log, the window of data we requested based on a window of time. And we're going to need to install these. And this is what we're going to be basing it on, Apex charts. I'm going to put the link into the code so you can see their documentation. I'm modeling it exactly like this basic documentation. In one case, we're going to have a line chart, and one case, we're going to have a pie chart. In the pie chart, we're going to have whoever sold an item selected and how many items they sold within a given amount of time. In the line chart, it'll be each item, how many times it was sold and which days it was sold. So I'm also going to have, we're going to be talking about which item, and I'm bringing in an item selected module, and that's going to tell us, it'll be the active option in the state, the active key and value in the state. Quantity will be represented here. Amounts sold will be compared with the quantity that we have in stock. And these are the basic properties that we're going to have for our chart. And if you go look at the documentation, I'm literally just typing what they have. These are just a taste of the options that they have. They have much more. And these will be the categories, which will be based on the dates. So one is based on who sold what, and the line graph will be which day how many were sold. And that'll be the label for the categories. Now remember how populate fields is a function that it exists already on the time selector module. I'm just going to name a function called populate fields here as well, so it'll match. It'll do something completely different, but that won't matter. And just put it in the right place so I can bind it. They are representing all of their documentation in class components, so therefore I'm writing this in the class component. If you want to switch it to hooks, you're welcome to. Some really basic HTML to lay out some titling and our charts. There we go. The time selector module, and we're passing the populate fields function from here to the module. So when on change occurs, populate fields will fire. All right, well, let's bring these items in from our local storage. Now when we select the an option off the item select menu, those values are going to be numbers, and then the number is going to match where the item is in the array of items, or in the object. So we're just basically going to go through and get the number, and that's going to tell us which item was selected based on the number, iteration number within the object. And then from there, you see that that iteration number is going to tell us which name was selected, and how much we have in the inventory, how many quantity of this item in inventory. Let's build an analytics button in our nav. We'll pass this active module string. So now you can see if active module equals analytics or log, the time selector will be represented. And we can do this as many times as we want, or take it away as many times as we want. That's the beauty of just asking which module is active, and we can make any combination that we need to. Sometimes items just need to be represented more than once. Tools like a time selector definitely comes under that category. I don't know why you would type it twice. Purchasing chart is our new module with our apex charts. Time selected is going to be the data passed down, the section of the purchase log that matches our window of time requested. And that needs to be a string. Let's take a look at the documentation here. All right, our analytics. There we go. Menu's working. All of our settings are ready to go. Now let's start working on what we need to do to get our data formatted correctly. This is for the pie chart. We need who's purchasing what. This would be for our line chart. Which dates were items purchased is going to be a list here for temp dates. And temp amount sold will be the number of items sold of a specific item on that specific day. Now, the initial for loop is going to go through time selected to set up our data correctly, to get things ready. And I mean that by, I need to get a list of all the individuals or dates listed within our time selected. And you remember we have to get out a substring. From 0 to the first colon is the email. So that will be our users. I say we put a little bit of example of what our object looks like. This is what our data looks like currently. Just one iteration of it. And now we're going to say, if the user list already has this user, then we're going to forget about it. But if it equals -1, saying this user's not in this list yet, we're going to add this new user. So our list is only going to list everyone one time. Now, currently, we just need to have a representation of how much this person sold. So 0 thus far, because we have not counted it. We need to make an array of the same number of zeros as there are users, because we'll be updating those based on their iteration number. Now here for the line chart, we're going to use this for loop as well. Why not? And we need to grab now a different part of the sale ID. That now we're going to get the date. So it's going to be the index past the colon. We don't want the colon. That's going to be the date. And we're just going to take out now, and we're going to cut that into, we just want the month, or the year, and the month. I'm sorry, the month and the day to start off with. We're just going to represent those because it'll be a really long tag name at the bottom otherwise. So if this date has not been represented, this month and day are not listed already in the temp dates, we're going to go ahead and add it. Along with, similar to our last one, we're going to add a 0 in the temp amount sold because we haven't counted the amount sold yet. We do need somewhere to start though, which will be 0. And we're also going to go ahead and alphabetize our temp user list. Now, let's get into the heavy counting of what was sold when by who. We're going to do another for loop. Through our time selected, And initially, for our pie chart, we're going to ask who. Okay, so if the item name equals the item selected within our selected item drop-down menu, we're going to run through and start counting. Now, if the user matches this sale, we're going to take that 0 that represents his sale, his or her sale, and add 1. So whatever that 0 is that matches the index of the user list, this individual that made the sale gets +1. Now for the line chart, it's very similar. But as opposed to asking who the individual sales was based on the email, the date will be represented as when something was sold. So we'll list all the dates. And we already have this code up here. There we go. Same thing from up there. So if it matches the item name, and it matches the day of sale, we're going to go to that 0 or whatever it was prior and add 1. One sale for that day. +1. And we go through each one and do this process. We got to make sure everything's spelled correctly. So there is a capital option in Visual Studio to make sure that you match caps as well. That's an easy one to forget. So luckily they have that. They can count how many times that made it and fix it really fast. Now here I want to also get the total amount sold of an item. So I'm going to use the reduce. Just basic JavaScript. Okay. Now let's get all those details from all those built objects and start setting state. These are all the things I need to change within the line chart and the pie chart. So the categories, as we remember, is going to be based on dates. So the temp dates that we built earlier is the list of dates that were our window of time selected. And this will be the amount of items sold per date. The array here will be the same number of items listed in the temp dates, and they will match, and according to index, the number of items sold per date. Now, this is where we made the reduction and come up with the sum of all the items sold that day, or the items that item sold that day. Quantity was determined based on our items selected. And if there were any items sold, I'm going to make a ternary operator. And if any items were sold, we'll represent our charts. There we go. Total items sold out of the quantity selected, of the item selected. And just make two columns here. We'll have our pie chart, our donut, on the left, and our line chart will be on the right. Like I said, you need to pass down the options, and this is according to the documentation they have, and we need to pass down a series. And what type of chart is this? This is all in their documentation. And just make sure everything's capitalized. There we go. It seems to be working for the pie chart and the donut. And I can't see the actual text. It's just because the Bootstrap theme I chose is too dark. So I'm just going to kind of modify the Bootstrap text so I can read it here in my CSS. I'm going to do the same ternary operator. So if there is data within our selected time window, we'll go ahead and write these charts out, and otherwise it'll be null. And it's interesting, you just write the same, it's very close to the same information you're sending out. You just tell it what style of chart you'd like to show. So I highly recommend using the Apex charts that are free. And the series is a little more complicated. I'm just going to pass the actual object. And just make sure everything's closed out with the object as well. And it's going to be a line chart. Here we are. There's our line chart with our data. Each date's represented. There was items sold. Once again, and as you can see, it doesn't tell us who though, so something's wrong with the labels for our donut chart. But the other data is working fine. Look like everything seems to be working. The hour is working. The user is working. We've got a couple small fixes. I got to fix where our users are up here, we can bring this to app because we're going to be going in and having a login. So app is going to be controlling who's using this, and we'll pass it down from here anyway. So let's get this over to our cart and our nav as well. And within the nav, let's take out this little title here and just write whoever the user is will be represented there in the brand icon top left. And let's make a quick purchase here. Well, within cart, we'll go ahead and represent it as well from our app to pass down. There we go. I'll make a couple items. Let's go check this out. Those are the sales I just made. And here is the items sold via the analytics. Let's change these series to what they're supposed to say. It's fairly simple. I just brought in the wrong data to the options. It's just supposed to be the options. There we go. These are all the individuals that made a sale that day, or made a sale within this window of time for this specific item. And all of our items are documented. When you do a select one day, there's only going to be one dot, so not a lot of details going on. The line chart's better when there's multiple days represented, but it still gives you the data you requested. Okay, so let's take out the double zeros. I don't know what time that would be and what day that would be, so that's not necessary in our counter. There we are. And back on our validation, we're not validating the quantity yet, and it's also not in a line item in our form. So I'm going to move it into a line item so it looks nice. Just a HTML update. And we also, as you can see here, we're validating that something's written there, but we're not validating that it's a number of the quantity. So I'm going to add that to my option down here, but I'm going to rename it to is numeric because it makes more sense. So I check if not only is there something there, but when you write in quantity, is it numeric? Just like we had for price in our validation. So let's check it. It's not numeric, so it's an error. So let's type in a number. Now it's okay. And then the analytics says 75, so that's what we wrote. Good. So that's all fixed up. And looks like this is where we leave off for the next tutorial. And eventually we're going to be doing a login, and we'll be doing a backend database, and we'll be passing tokens back and forth to make sure that we have a secure application.